Today I had a great conversation with Eric Partaker, an award-winning entrepreneur, peak performance expert, and mentor for Fortune 50 CEOs. Eric is the author of The 3 Alarms, a simple system to transform your health, wealth, and relationships forever, which teaches you a technique to create habits through identity change through the use of 3 alarms on your phone. It's an amazing conversation, and if you use these techniques, you will change your life for the better. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Eric, welcome to the Growth Guide podcast. Where I'd love to start before we dive into your book, The 3 Alarms, is to get the readers up to speed a bit about who you are and what you do, so that they're aware of everything as we dive into the book. So can you give a little brief bio on Eric's history, and then we'll dive in?
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here, Clint. And so our household is like the United Nations. So I'm half Norwegian, half American. My wife is Brazilian. We live in Portugal. The kids speak like 4 languages. So it's a real, mixed bag. We're kind of citizens of the world. And that kind of mixture appears within my career as well. So I started off as a consultant with McKinsey & Company, then did a bit of nonprofit work for a while, helped in the early days of Skype, back when Skype was cool, with the blitz scaling of that. And then we had a big exit to eBay for a few $1 billion back in, I think it was like 2005, 2006. Was missing Mexican food, having grown up on it in Chicago, so was trying to figure out what to do next. And then built what became an award-winning chain of Mexican restaurants in the UK, and lived in the UK for a total of 17 years. Lived in Norway, lived in the US. Now live in Portugal. And these days, my wife and I, we support about 30 CEOs at any one point in time, helping them scale their companies, their leadership, and themselves. So yeah, that's a quick intro.
And Eric, what was the chain of Mexican restaurants?
Chilango.
Chilango, wow.
Yeah.
Impressive. That was one I wasn't aware of. So where I'd love to start as we dive into the book is taking you back a little in time, which really was the impetus of the book and of changing your life. And what we're talking about is there was a time when you had a wake-up call that you were sacrificing your relationships, your body, and your son, and for so-called success, as you had defined it for yourself at that time. I've been where you were. For me, it showed up as adrenal shutdown, my son not looking me in the eye, not telling me he loved me anymore. And so what was happening in your life that led to that? And can you take us through what that wake-up call looked like?
Sure. So maybe I'll start at the climax, and then we can go back and then forward. So I was on a flight, and my colleague could see that I wasn't well. He ran to get the attention of a stewardess. Stewardess calls for a doctor. Luckily for me, there was one on board. Doctor rushes over, takes my vital signs, and says we need to land the plane immediately. He's having a heart attack. And when you hear those words, 35,000 feet in the air, I can promise you, you have never felt more alone, more terrified, more like regretful, like every negative emotion all rolled into one. The descent felt like an eternity as we, made our way to make an emergency landing. And as I looked up into, obviously we reached the runway. I'm whisked away into an ambulance waiting on the runway. They administered nitrates to open up the blood flow to my heart. And I looked up into the eyes of the paramedic looking down at me, and I said, please don't let me die. I have a 5-year-old son. And he said, I think we got you, just in time. So, sit tight. And the next day when I woke up in the hospital, I thought about, what had gotten me to that point. And as you had alluded to, it was, I had always been obsessed with reaching my full potential since I was a kid. But it was, there's 2 ways you can approach, I think, realize, becoming all that you're capable of being in life. And in the first half of my career, I approached it from a place of lack. like I need this to feel complete. I'm not worthy if I'm not, doing X, Y, or Z. In the second half of my career now, I approach it from a place of abundance, so I'm already complete, but I'm going to add two things. And, I think that was probably emerged from childhood, just this constant feeling of always being second best, this fear of like squandering, my potential. And that led to a lot of overworking, just a lot of, soul sacrificing. I was doing like 100-hour weeks at McKinsey and Company during the blitz scaling days of Skype, building, more than one of my own businesses. And so that eventually took its toll because I was only trying to put in as many hours as I could at work. And I was doing, the bare minimum to get by on, the health and relationship fronts. And it caught up with me. And, my body, as described, basically said enough is enough. And then that prompted, some deep reflection because I still wanted to reach my full potential. That didn't change. But I realized that I had to obviously find a better way. And that started a journey. I went really deep into peak performance. I went really deep in trying to just, understand behavior change and neuroscience and, habit formation. And how do I do this all basically without sacrificing my health and relationships? And then that's as you correctly pointed out, that's essentially the focus of my book, The Three Alarms, which is, what did the journey look thereafter to get to, where things are today.
And so when you look at that and you talk about going deep into the neuroscience, into the habits, high performance, you talk about using the concept that British cycling's Dave Brailsford used, being marginal gains or marginal improvements. And he used that for the British team and for Team Sky. Can you bring the listeners up to speed on what he was talking about and how you use that concept of marginal improvements in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for context, as the coach or as like the performance coach, for the cycling team, his belief was that if you want to optimize performance on the field of play, then as any good sports coach, would be thinking you have to optimize everything off the field of play as well. It's not enough to just show up and give it your all on game day. So that's what I was doing in the first half of my career. I was just thinking of optimizing my performance on the field of play, not off the field of play, like health, relationships, off the field, on the field, your work. And those three, by the way, health, work, relationships, to me, that's the 80-20 of life improvement. The 20% of things you can focus on for 80% of the improvement you're seeking. I also kind of refer to it as like the three-legged stool. You need minimum of 3 legs for a stool to have stability. You take out one leg and it starts to wobble. So what he did back, to the cycling team example is he looked at, absolutely everything, down to what were the mattresses that the cyclists were sleeping on. And what gave each cyclist like the best night's sleep, and transporting even those mattresses from location to location. So even their sleep on an individual basis was being optimized. The diet being optimized, the training specific to the cyclist being optimized, such that all these small little things added together, whereas individually you might not think they're worth it because let's say they offer 0.25% of improvement. But in athletics, if you do 10 things that offer 0.25% improvement such that you're 2.5% ahead, when you're at an elite level and you're already, say, giving 90%, 92.5, that's a big deal. That's the championship right there. So where I was going wrong, prior was that really 2 things. So I referenced one already. I wasn't thinking about off the field stuff. How do I optimize health and home? But also too, I was going, the whole thing, go big or go home. Like it sounds great, but it doesn't work. It's like one of these things that people say and they throw out there and it's kind of like a BS thing. I was swinging for the fences every single time. So, I gotta, knock this project out, of the park. Okay, well, let's put in, why 100 hours? Let's put 120 hours this week into it, right? That stuff doesn't work. So examples of, how I started to change. Well, one was I noticed this tendency within me for perfectionism. And that not only would lead to taking way too long to do just about anything, but it also meant that I often procrastinated because I didn't have enough time to get started, or I didn't have enough time, to get finished. And so it just made everything drag on and on and on. And I really zeroed in on the 80-20 law as the best way I could combat and cure my own perfectionism. So 80-20 simply says that, the world is nonlinear and a minority of things create the majority of effects. So, I referenced 80-20 earlier with health, work, and relationships. 20% of the factors you could focus on life, for 80% of the improvement, that you're seeking. 80-20 in the context of a project could be if let's say I'm working on a presentation. And for me to deliver, a perfect presentation, let's assume it's going to take 5 hours to complete. Well, the question is, if you were to give it your all for just 1 hour, 20%, could you create something that was 80% good enough, such that you free up those next 4 hours to do whatever you like, work less, or move on to the next thing, right? And so, and if you do that mathematically, right, like let's talk about an economics class, like what was it, Udals, right? So it's like, if you're going to put in 100, right, and you get 100 of value in terms of the presentation, you get 100 Udals, right? And that takes 5 hours to produce. If I'm going to do 1 hour and produce something worth 80, I got 80 in that 1 hour. But now if I do that for the next 4 hours and get 80 in each of those as well, 80 times 5 hours, 400. So literally the 80-20 rule, in a way, mathematically speaking, can allow you to 4x your output just by looking at, looking for leverage, right? What's the 20% of effort I could put in for 80% of the result? Now, this doesn't, of course, apply in all situations. And you have to respect that, I'm just, using this as an example, right? To help, free up your thinking. In manufacturing, you can't get away with like 80%. You need like 99.999999. But there's other interesting ways to approach that as well. And I'll give one more example of how I started to put less on myself. So 80-20, you can 80-20 something yourself, but then you could delegate it perhaps to someone on the team, right? So you do a first draft, you get it to 80%, and then you hand that off to someone and you ask them, can you 80-20 the remaining 20%? Right? Mathematically, what does that get us to? Well, that's 96% is usually, good enough, right? That would be a good result. So yeah, I mean, it's just one example of how I started to, free myself up to do more with less, essentially.
Let's stay on this one for a minute, because the 80-20 principle is massive in my life as well, and I write about it a fair bit. It's one of the reasons you can do some of the things that other people say, hey, you can't drink Starbucks or eat avocado toast and be a millionaire. And it's like, well, if I'm focusing on the right 20% of things consistently, I can do other things at the edges that aren't actually going to have an impact. So when you think about the 80-20 rule, one of the good examples you use that can bring it around to people is this concept of diet or health, and how the 20% applies to your diet or health. Because the second half of the 80-20 rule is something that you and I both align on, which is the simple line that most of these things are simple, but they're not easy.
No.
So how does simple but not easy tie to the 80-20 rule if we look at something like physical fitness or diet?
Yeah, right. So, a few things, come to mind. So first of all, let's start with the fact that typically everyone who wants to get in shape, me included, right? I'm in a phase right now, actually, where I'm like, okay, time to get into a little bit of, better shape here. We can easily overwhelm ourselves, right? And so let's just talk about like the 80, this is meta. I'm just like literally thinking out loud right now, but let's just talk about like the 80-20 of improving anything. So first of all, if you take the non-80-20 approach to let's develop an improvement plan, you can get lost on the internet because there's a million different ways that you could probably get into shape. There's a million different diet plans out there. That's not really the issue. The issue is just picking one, any of them, really, like just any of them, because they all are linked to the primary, another level of 80-20 here. So what's the 20% of things, to focus on to actually lose weight? Well, just consume less calories than than you require, right? And just about, I don't think there's a diet plan on the planet that is about you. And I'm not talking about bulking up as a bodybuilder. I'm talking about losing weight plans. I think they're pretty much all aligned on, you got to eat less than what you need. It's not like, hey, you're going to lose weight by eating ice cream. So, that's the first thing that comes to mind is just pick one thing, rather than try to do a million things. And then when it comes to getting into shape, there's like a few things, again, to not get lost in it all, to focus on. So first and foremost, I would just focus on sleep. If you don't sleep well, you're going to be, if you wake up tired, you're going to be more prone to, snacking. You're going to be more prone to not following through on your routines, such as like working out. I even think biologically speaking, and I'm not a scientist here, but I'm fairly certain that if you're not well rested, it even messes up the way your body converts calories, and you're more likely to put on fat, essentially.
If you're very sleep deprived for sustained periods of time, your mind or your brain says the only time someone is this sleep deprived is when they're in a state of starvation. So let's conserve calories. I read that one recently. I'd have to definitely, internet people fact check us, but it's the brain saying, hey, usually when someone's in this state, it comes with starvation, i.e. our ancestors couldn't go to sleep because they needed to hunt food. So let's go into a state of preservation of calories. And so we bulk up because we're not sleeping, not only the bad food choices, but so I believe you are correct on that one.
Yeah, so you got sleep. The next thing, to think about is exercise. And I'm saving, it's probably the biggest problem and also dial mover for the last one, but exercise. And I think people, most people would benefit from doing a combination of strength and cardio within a week. And the way I approach it is 3 cardio sessions, 3 strength sessions a week. You can do them on the same day if you want. You can break them up. And then last but not least, I think 70% of the results you get from fitness routine will come down to what you're eating, because you can eat a ton of crap and then it feels like you're going nowhere. It doesn't feel like you're getting stronger. It doesn't look like you're getting stronger. And if you look at nutrition, one of the commonalities, again, here's another example of 80-20. So across all the eating plans out there, one of the most common set of factors that you'll see is, eat whole foods, mostly plants, don't eat real food, mostly plants, don't eat sugar, basically. I think Michael Pollan says this in one of his books. I forget which one it was. And when we talk about eating real food, what does that mean? Well, if it has an ingredients label on it, it's not real food. That's the way I look at it, right? Because, a potato, what does a potato say on it? Potato. There's nothing else to say. Carrot. But if it has ingredients, pasta, do you find pasta growing on trees? No. Does it have an ingredient list? Yes. So real food is the stuff that typically doesn't have an ingredient list that you could just find, right, in nature. And sugars sound self-explanatory, but it's not just candy bars. Drinking loads of fruit juices, for example, that doesn't help, right? That's not how nature intended it, right? An apple is delivered with its juice connected to the fiber of the apple so that you don't get a massive sugar rush, as you're eating it. You juice the apple and you don't have any of the fiber that it's coming with, you're basically getting like nature's equivalent of a candy bar. So there's a few thoughts and examples about how to kind of simplify what to focus on with regard to health.
And so if we look at that and we talk about, I always come back to, there's an old video that was on the internet when I was much younger called The Fat Smoker. and his recipe for weight loss, because he became not the fat smoker, which was the whole point of the video, was, people always look for the magic bullet, and he's like, eat less, exercise more. So when you go right down to bare bones simplicity, weight loss, eat less, exercise more. And most things in life are that simple. You want to be more financially independent, earn more, spend less, right? Like we can always boil it down to that level of simplicity. But that level of simplicity isn't easy. And you highlight, it's the magic button, right? You have your magic button exercise. If you could press this and you could be X, would you want it? And people say yes. Now, it's simple to get there, but most of us don't get there. And that's because there are common blockers in our way. You already talked about one of them being perfectionism. You talk about 4 others. Can you let the listeners know at a high level, what are some of the things that are blocking them? And can we deep dive into procrastination together? Because that's one that you go a little deeper on. You have your 4 steps, and we can talk about that one a little deeper. But high level, what are the things that are blocking people from doing what's otherwise simple?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the deepest level, it's this false belief that you need to want or to like or to desire, everything that you do in life. We have a great life right now. We live in Portugal. I don't work a full week. Are there still things on a daily basis that I have to do that I don't want to do? Yeah, all the time. And I think, when you go through life requiring, everything to be exactly as you would like it, to be, then you're just setting yourself up for failure. And that's also, too, one of the triggers of procrastination. So in the course of a day, you will have to, nobody ever procrastinates on something that they absolutely want to do, right? And that they're excited to do. You don't need, overcoming procrastination techniques for that. Do you need overcoming procrastination techniques to do your tax return? Yes, because ever going to want to do their tax return. I mean, maybe there's some accountants out there that, relish in the moment every year, but not for me. And that's, a segue to one of the simplest procrastination tactics that I've used is recognizing the self-talk that goes in your head. So if you were to verbalize what you're saying in the moment that you are starting to procrastinate or you feel the procrastination coming on, there is a sentence going on in your head that probably is along the lines of, I have to, finish whatever it is, or I should be doing, whatever it is. And this is language of oppression, right? You're being forced to do something you don't want to do. I have to. Or you're being compared to an ideal that you're currently not satisfying. I should, but I'm not. Either way, that's going to create resistance. It's a natural response. The self-defense tactic is procrastination, right? So that's what happens. If you feel like you're being forced to do anything, well, what do? Well, I'm not going to do it. And so you put it off. So if you instead start to get into the habit of recognizing when this negative self-talk is happening and change the language to language of choice rather than language of oppression, and simply use the construct of I choose to instead of I have to, right? You don't need to like doing a tax return, but you can still choose to do it. And that's better than, I have to do it. And instead of focusing on the finish, as in I have to finish, if instead you focus on the start, because I have to finish, well, how long is it going to take to finish? I don't know. That's hard to estimate. That's going to trigger overwhelm. How long does it take to start? Well, that happens in a second, right? So instead of I have to finish, I choose to start. And then you need to make it super small. And you can add a further element to that construct. I choose to start for just 5 minutes. And when I tell myself that, okay, I got to do my tax return. I don't feel like doing this. Hang on. I choose to start for just 5 minutes. I never know when that 300th second has gone by, right? Because you just get lost into what you're doing. It's like they say, the hardest part about going for a run, they say, is putting on the trainers, right? So it's like similar concept here. It's physics, right? A body in motion tends to stay in motion. So, the most important thing is to find easy ways to get the ball rolling and create motion. Just if you can get past that initial feeling of resistance, then you kick in, to the momentum effect.
Yeah, whether it's the 2-minute rule or the 5-minute rule, basically the starting gets you going, right? So number one thing for people, whatever it is you want to do, if you want to be a runner, well, go run for 2 minutes, it'll become 10, it'll become 20. If you want to be a writer, write for 2 minutes, it'll become 10, it'll become 20. And if you do that consistently enough, you're going to become what you want to be. So that's a beautiful way to do it. So earlier in the conversation, you talked about it, but we didn't go into it, was the concept of the three-legged stool. And I believe you said health, wealth, and relationships. Can you talk a bit about that? And then we'll dive into some of the things that people can do to improve in these different areas of their life.
Sure. Yeah. So, and when I say wealth, I mean both, how you make the money, so what you do for work, and then what you do with the money thereafter. Some people just want to refer to it as work, health, work, and relationships, health, wealth, and relationships, whatever floats your boat. But this for me is as mentioned, the 80-20 to life improvement. And I recognized that I had been over tracking on the work front and not paying enough attention to the health and relationship fronts. And one of the most powerful things that I learned from one of my early mentors, I remember he said to me, Eric, rather than try to gradually change yourself, which takes a long period of time, it's much easier just to switch to a new identity so that you can change instantaneously. And that might sound like far-fetched and a bit superhero-ish. It is superhero-ish in the fact that when you were a kid, you used to do this all the time. You used to change into a superhero, and in a moment's notice, your behavior matched your identity. And so really what this is not something new to any human being on the planet. It's more about reigniting a dormant, a capability that's gone dormant, typically, after the age of 13 or so. Reigniting this ability to, instead of creating the new you from the bottoms up, building it behavior after behavior, you go back to how you used to do things as a child, you create it top down, where you decide what the identity is, and then that drives the behavior. And if anybody listening who has kids, and if you can't remember your own, childhood, you'll know this to be true with your kids, right? We bought our youngest son a Captain America shield. The shield arrived, we gave it to him, and he instantly became Captain America. We didn't have to sit him down and do behavioral training. And that's once again because identity drives behavior. So how does this relate to health, work, and relationships? Well, I decided to create superhero identities in each of those domains and give them a name, and identities that meant something to me, identities that represented me at my best in each of those domains. So on the health front, I chose the phrase world fitness champion. I'm not one, I never will be one, but that's the version of me, strong, focused, disciplined, that shows up at the gym in the morning, especially on the mornings that I don't feel like working out. Because would a world fitness champion need to feel like working out in order to do the workout? Never. They would just get it done, whether they felt like doing it or not, right? On the work front, the identity I'm using at the moment is world's best coach. Again, are there better coaches out there? I'm sure there are. But that reminds me, how do I need to be showing up today for, the 30 CEOs that I help as a CEO coach? And then on the relationship front, my kind of superhero identity is world's best husband and father. Again, I'm not. But I know for a fact that before I had that level of intentionality on the home front, I just drifted, right? When I decided what this identity was and actually put it into my phone and timed it for a certain time of day. So I took that identity, world's best husband and father, I timed it for 6:30 p.m., put it on my phone to prompt the question, how would the world's best husband and father walk through that door right now? And when I started to have that intentionality, defining what best looks like, setting a reminder on my phone to cue it at the right time of day, over time, I started to close that gap between my current and best self on the home front. And then I did the same thing with those other identities. 6:30 a.m., I put an alarm on my phone that said World Fitness Champion to cue that identity. And at 9 a.m., I put an alarm on my phone that says World's Best Coach, again, to cue that identity. The point isn't these phone alarms. That's just like a fun way to kind of mess around with it. But they're like training wheels on the intentionality bicycle. The point is to become more intentional in your life in each of these three areas and find a way of checking in with it, reminding yourself so that, again, you can close the gap between who you are and, who you're capable of being.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy what you're hearing so far and want me to be able to get your favorite guests on this show, please do me a quick favor. Subscribe to the show and leave me a rating. The 30 seconds of your time will mean a ton to me.
What I really want to zone in and dive a little deeper on with you there is this idea of, you talked about through most of your life you drifted. And then you brought a level of intentionality to each of these areas. And intentionality to me seems to be the number one way we can bring ourselves off of autopilot, which is often the way most of us live our lives. And so what was it that highlighted to you that you needed to bring that level of intentionality? And so you've talked about crafting those identities. How do you make the behaviors and habits stick? And how do you keep that level of intentionality in your life and not get back into autopilot?
Right. Okay. And sorry, remind me, what was the first question?
How do you make the behaviors stick? So you've got the identity you want to create. How do we make that permanent?
Right.
How do we go from, this idea of Clint's going to be the best dad. How do I stay that best dad? And I think intentionality may be part of that.
Yes, great question. So it's all well and good to, choose these identities, but you then need to evidence them on a daily basis. And that's something that I've sort of gamified. So I think of these identities as like the champion versions of me is another way I think about them. And so on a daily basis, I think, what are the champion proofs? Almost like mathematics, right? Like, how am I going to prove today that I'm a world fitness champion? How do I prove today, in the context of today, based on today's schedule, meetings, work that I need to do? How will I prove that I'm the world's best CEO? Similarly, on the home front, what am I going to do that will evidence that I'm the world's best husband and father? And I do this every single day. And all I do is I just choose what the number one thing is that I can do in each department. And if the whole day went to, crap and I hadn't achieved anything, but as long as I achieved those three things, I'd still feel, pretty good. And I'll give you some examples. So let's say it's a cardio day for working out. And I know that, I did 600 calories, on my stationary cycling session. Well, I'm going to be asking, okay, if I were to step it up today, can I do 650? On the work front, there might be a proposal that I want to get out. And I just tell myself, no matter what, that is going out today. That's the number one thing I could do today. Or it could be even simpler. It could be that I have a day full of meetings, but I look at one in particular and I go, you know what? That one out of all of them, that's the most important one. I'm going to really show up at my best in that meeting and make sure I actively participate rather than passively kind of, exist. And then on the home front, in the context of a day, I might just say, you know what? I'm just going to send my wife a nice note or something, or make sure I spend, a little bit of time playing, a game with one of the kids. The point is you could pick literally anything. And it's about just getting into the habit of asking yourself, what does best look like today? And what's the number one thing I could do to evidence that? And when you start to do those things, if you picture this like a dartboard. So there's a dartboard on the wall and the bullseye is you at your best. And on a daily basis, you start out with 3 darts: a health dart, a wealth dart, and a relationship dart. And when you choose your number ones, you're throwing them. And over time, I guarantee you, even if you suck at darts, over time, you will get closer and closer and closer to that bullseye. Every time you throw and go for a number one on a daily basis, however small it is, it's a repetition. You're developing skill. You're developing the ability to bridge the gap between, strategy and execution in a way, right? Having the intention to doing something and actually doing it. So that's the way I think about these things, and how I kind of connect them together.
And so a few things that I'd love to dive deep with you on there. So when you look at this idea that a big part of that intentionality, you look at my day tomorrow, and these are the things I'm going to focus on. So there's a level of intentionality of realizing you own your time. And so you're designing your day. And so that's something you talk about in the book, but you also just brought up there. Can we dive into the importance of taking ownership and control of designing your day? And then how do you use the what gets measured gets managed to look back and say, hey, how did my week go? And then how did my quarter go? It seems like that's your rhythm and cadence, is to analyze your weeks and analyze your quarters, but also within the day have evening routines to wind it down and morning routines to rev it up. What does that look like in terms of ownership and intentionality and purpose-driven life design?
Yeah, well, let's start with the day, because if you look back over a period of time, and if you view that period of time as successful versus kind of like neutral versus unsuccessful, your answer will very likely relate to how many of the days during that period of time were winning days. Days that you felt proud of, days that you showed up and did what you said you were going to do, days where you did your best. Now, to achieve that, there's 3 routines that I install in my day. And I start with an evening routine, because a productive day never begins the morning of, it begins the night before with how you shut down that day. And there's an acronym that I follow, SD8, so like sedate, right? If you creatively, pronounce it. The S is a shutdown ritual. So last half hour before I would like my day to end, I do a final scan of my email. I update my to-do list. I look at my calendar for the next day. I choose the top 3 things I want to do, and I schedule them into my calendar as appointments with myself. 1 hour before I go to bed, such that I'll get 8 hours of sleep, I do a digital sunset. And the digital sunset is simply all electronics off, helps calm the mind, and also helps with your melatonin production. Because artificial light, especially from your devices in that last hour before bed, can reduce your melatonin by 50%. And we need melatonin to promote deep sleep. Without deep sleep, we don't wake up feeling productive. We don't have a winning day, right? And then, the 8, as mentioned, for 8 hours of sleep. Next routine is a morning routine. Mine consists of a few things, but I think in the simplest way to recommend a morning routine would be to just focus on like 2 factors, really. So one is, if possible, try to spike your energy. So a bit of exercise, proven, if you have a bit of vigorous exercise, that's proven to spike your mood for up to 12 hours, equivalent in strength to taking an antidepressant. 12 hours, that's enough to get you through your day. So if you can exercise in the morning, it puts you in a good mood, spikes your energy. And then the other thing that I try to do is always be creative before reactive. So for the first hour of the day, right, don't start in your inbox. Don't start in social media. If all you did, from what I'm suggesting here in terms of productivity, if all you did was without fail block the first 60 minutes of your day to work on your most important task, that alone right there would be a game changer for you. If you had a rule, and you could make something crazy in your head, like there's a man next to me, and if I work on anything other than creative output, I'm dead. Turn it into Squid Game. Then you'd just be amazed, right? If you were creative before reactive. What should you be working on? Whatever you had decided in the shutdown routine the night before was your number one task. That can go into that first hour of the day. And then the last routine is a working routine. So as you start your work day, how do you approach work? And the single biggest move that you can take there is to focus on single tasking. So in the book, The One Thing, they talk about a study, I think it was based out of Stanford University, that showed that the average person loses about 28% of their workday to multitasking ineffectiveness, which is essentially task switching. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 28% extrapolated across the work weeks in a year is an entire 13 weeks lost per year, meaning the average person loses a calendar quarter every year. It's like playing a basketball game. You get to the third quarter, you've finished, you're ready to start the fourth quarter, and the referee says, "Oh no, forgot to tell you, you have to sit out." And you're like, well, how the hell are we going to win? The other team's still shooting. Well, you're not, because you're only playing with 3 quarters in your year instead of 4. So if you focus on single tasking, not jumping around, but just do one thing at a time, you can reclaim those 13 weeks a year. So I'll take a pause there for a moment, but that's how I approach a day in terms of evening, morning, and workday routines.
Now, a natural question that's going to jump out to the listener may be, well, Eric, that's great, but you also run your life. You own your business. You're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur. You don't have the same demands on your time that I do as a worker bee in a system that has less choice. So how do I use what you're talking about to better my life? What do you throw out at that listener?
Yeah. So first of all, don't recognize that out of those 3 routines that I just mentioned, the bookends of your day, the evening and the morning, you have the most control over those. So you'd be crazy to not take advantage of those, right? Yes, you have the messy middle, which has different degrees of messiness depending on what your life situation is and what your work situation looks like. But absolutely take ownership of the bookends of the evening and the morning. Number 2, this sort of stuff is great to have a conversation about with the people that you're working with. Start off a productive conversation. Explain that I would love to be even more productive in my role. I think that as a team, while we're producing at X level, we could probably produce at an even higher level if we could agree some standards in terms of, what's a reasonable response time when someone messages you? Can we agree some standard as a team of when we acknowledge that we're all kind of, heads down doing focused work, so that even if we send a message, we're not expecting a response. That cuts across a week. It's like 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. where it's going to be, focused work for everyone. Or maybe it's certain days. Mondays and Tuesdays are meeting days. Wednesday is a no meeting day. And then Thursday is meeting days again. And Friday is something else. But I think when you're in an environment where you're not, in full control from a work point of view, then it really ups the requirement on kind of communicating the why with the rest of the team and getting some buy-in on certain things to try in terms of communication standards and like protected focus time.
Love it. And then so having those string of successful days is super important. How do you use your weekly review and then quarterly review to make sure that you're on track? And when you look at the quarterly one, do you do any, you have the 90-day year that people talk about. Is that something that you employ in your life? Is there a big reason for the quarterly review that drives the years?
Yeah, no, great question. So on a weekly basis, super important to set up a review. I think I've experimented with a lot. It's always changing. I think the ideal time to do it is on a Friday afternoon, so that you can kind of go into your weekend knowing you got next week covered. And what I do in a weekly review is I look at what went well for the week, what could have gone better, what did I learn. I look at the calendar that's just passed. I look at the next 2 weeks ahead. I check in with my goals. And then I ask myself, what are the 3 most important things that I want to do this week? And then I schedule those things once again into the calendar. So that means that you're both doing that scheduling into the calendar on a weekly basis and then kind of reconfirming and checking in as part of your shutdown routine on a daily basis too. And I get to the end of the week and I complete that review again. At the end of a quarter, I'm doing the exact, pretty much exact same thing, but just quarterly version of it, right? So it's, what went well, what didn't, is there any, unfinished business from the quarter? What are the key things that I learned? And, what actions will I take next quarter, as a result? And that kind of level, that constant introspection combined with deciding, being intentional about what you're going to work on and when, again, has a hugely, positive effect on what you can or can't achieve.
I love that. I'm a big fan of what gets measured gets managed in all areas of our life. So that's pretty big right there. And the other concept that I'd love to dive into with you is this idea that when we're wanting to be productive, having those massive goals equals massive results. And I often say to people, when you think of a concept like 10x your performance or 10x your profitability, whatever it is you want to 10x, one of the reasons we use that idea of 10x is you can incrementally improve anything without necessarily having to change how you're doing it. But when you want to 10x something, you have to redesign the whole process. If you will, you have to choose a new identity. You can't just incrementally improve the old identity. So why is the massive goals equals massive output so big for you? And how do you use that in your life?
This one you got to be very strategic with, because as I mentioned at the start of our conversation, I kind of fired a warning about the whole phrase, go big or go home, right? So that may sound then, this conversation may sound like it's contradicting that, but so that's why I want to explain. The go big or go home reference is, we have to be careful with that if you're applying that to absolutely everything that you do. But not all things are created equal. If you look back on your life right now, just think, if you go back to your life, there were forks in the road where you went right instead of left and something bad happened, or you went left instead of right and, boy, was that a good decision, and it had a ricochet effect on the rest of your life thereafter until the next major fork in the road. Again, life is nonlinear, and there are, not all decisions are created equal. And so it takes a bit of art to think through, okay, well, where does it make sense to go big? Where would achieving a certain thing, have a positive ricochet effect on, other aspects of my life? And I'll give you an example from my own background. So, at one point in my career, I doubted, myself as a CEO, and I spoke to, my business kind of coach and mentor at the time, and asked him, what were his thoughts? And he said, well, you just need to step it up. You just need to, believe in yourself, but you need something, to help you in that respect. And he said, what about the CEO of the Year award? And there was, a national CEO of the Year award in Britain. And I said, okay, well, that sounds a bit crazy to go for that. I mean, that's like over the top. I just want to kind of shore up some of my leadership abilities. But that was an example of, by choosing a massive goal like that, it prompted me to take massive action that I wouldn't have normally taken. So I really invested a lot of time in my leadership development, more time than I would have normally. I reached out to top performing CEOs to interview them to understand what drove their success. I, really spent a lot of time with my team, to understand, from their point of view, how could I be a better leader? And then all of that factored into my own leadership development plan, which culminated in winning this CEO of the Year recognition. So yeah, that's, an example.
So, we've gone through a lot of the ways we can make life better. We can be more productive. And you talked a little bit about the 3 alarms that you use to take on those identities at different points of your day. I didn't dive too deep into that one with you at the time because I wanted to wrap the book up with the 3 alarms. So can you take the readers through how do you use your iPhone and the naming capability that you have on it to choose the 3 identities that you have and how you're going to enter those states each day, which are the 3 alarms that we can set up for our health, wealth, and relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but if you go into your phone, if you go into the alarm section, when you go to set an alarm, you'll find that you can either change its name or its label, and you can have it say something essentially. And so what I did is literally went in, created an alarm that said World Fitness Champion, timed it for 6:30 a.m. because that's the time that I work out, and that's the time I want to be reminded of that identity. I created another alarm for 9 a.m. that says World's Best CEO because that's when I'm sat down. World's Best Coach, sorry, because that's when I'm sat down and I want to be reminded, okay, well, how do I need to be showing up for the CEOs that I serve? And then at 6:30 p.m., another alarm, World's Best Husband and Father, because that's typically when I'm wrapping up my day and going from the office into the house. And I want to prompt the question in my mind, how would the world's best husband and father walk through that door right now? Yeah, so it's just a matter of going into your phone and choosing an identity, giving it a name, the superhero version of you in each of those domains, health, wealth, relationships, and then setting it at the most appropriate time of day that would benefit from being, reminded of what best looks like for you.
Now, if I'm setting 5 alarms, am I trying to bite off more than I can chew? And do I need to work? Okay. That was the first question.
I think so, because it's slippery slope then, right? And we need, this is like a meta application of Parkinson's law, right? So it's like we need to contain things or else they'll drift. It's sort of like Warren Buffett's story where he's like, what are the top 25 things that you want to do? Okay. Now, what are the top 5 out of those 25? Okay. So those are the 5 that you should do. And then the other 20, those are the things that you absolutely should not even come close to touching. Right.
Yeah, I love it. And for our listeners who don't know Parkinson's law, work will expand to consume the time that you give to it. So give yourself tight, short deadlines and you'll get the work done because you'll focus on the 20% you need to do. Not the other 80% actually takes as long or longer than that original 20%. So love that, Eric. Eric, can I fire a quick rapid fire 4 questions we do to end the show at you?
Sure.
Okay. So the first is, what is one book you've read that was most influential in your life?
I would say the Now Habit by Neil Fiore, which is a strategic program to overcome procrastination, which was the inspiration for many of the ideas about overcoming procrastination that I share in my book, The 3 Alarms. So definitely, pick up a copy of that. It's incredible.
Love it. And this whole time we've been talking, I've been consumed by that bookshelf behind you. So the second question is what are you currently reading?
Oh, God. I'm one of these people who reads like several things at once. So I have Multipliers going at the moment. I have Wired for Story going at the moment. I Never Metaphor I Didn't Like going at the moment. So I'm in this big kick about Multipliers is a book on leadership, but I'm also trying to go deep on the use of metaphor and storytelling.
So what was that third one?
Here, I can show it to you as well. So it's I Never Metaphor I Didn't Like.
Oh, that sounds great. I Never Metaphor I Didn't Like. Okay, I'm gonna.
That's cool.
Okay. And what's one thing that Eric has spent less than $1,000 on in the last 18 to 24 months that you've thought to yourself, wow, I wish I'd bought that sooner?
Less than $1,000 on the last 24 months. I wish I would have bought that sooner. Be another book. I bought this book, Inbound Marketing. It's one of the HubSpot books. And yeah, I think it was written in 2014, and I'm kind of reading it like 9 years later.
Which can often be good because then it stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one, because the show's about growth, what is one habit, behavior change, mindset shift you've made in your life that has had the greatest impact on you?
Oh, gosh. 100%. It's developing the muscle, the capacity to do whatever needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not.
Discipline equals freedom. I love it. So, and some of these guys, like, these are things we do when we lead to levels of success. But when someone has a tagline that just fits it so well, like Jocko does for that one, or James Clear on the identity one, every choice you make is a vote for the person you want to be. It's like, oh, such a good line. Yeah. So we went pretty wide. We went deep in some of the areas. Is there anything we missed that you want to make sure that we can get across to the listener from this conversation?
I don't think so. I think it's about, with any conversation, it's about zeroing in on where do you think change would have the greatest impact, for you. Like if you've listened to this conversation, think of it this way. If you weren't to act on anything at all that you heard today, so basically everything remains as is, where would action, just one action, have the greatest impact for you? Or said in another way, if you were to not change at all based on today's conversation, except for just one thing, where would change have the greatest impact for you? And then just start there.
Love it. And where can our listeners find you?
Just go to the website, Eric with a C, ericpartaker.com. And you'll find a bunch of stuff there. And there's even a free digital copy of the book, The 3 Alarms there. So
a great read for anyone who's listening. So get to the website. We'll have it in a show notes. Get your free copy of the book. A wonderful, wonderful read. I now have to take a lot of what we talked about and stick it into my second brain, so it's always accessible. And very, very glad to have you on the show today, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Clint. And thanks for all those listening. Thanks for your time.
If you like the podcast, you'll love our new newsletter, The Growth Guide. Every Thursday, straight to your inbox, with the goal to help you be better, achieve more, and become financially free. Check it out at our website, thegrowth.guide. Subscribe and learn more.